You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin.
The moment I saw the boy's eyes, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. What I thought was an act of kindness had led me straight into a trap, and now I was facing a nightmare I never could have imagined. I've always been an adventurous soul. That's why, when I felt the stress of my job in the city becoming too much, I decided to take a solo camping trip in the vast wilderness of Maine. I craved the solitude, the chance to clear my head and reconnect with nature. If only I'd known what was waiting for me in those woods. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for. I hiked through dense forests, marveling at the towering pines and the chorus of birdsong that accompanied me. I set up camp near crystal-clear streams, falling asleep to the gentle babble of water over rocks. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. It was on the fourth day that everything changed. I had ventured further into the wilderness than I'd planned, drawn by the promise of a beautiful valley I'd spotted on my map. The hike was challenging, but the views were worth it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I started to make my way back to my campsite. That's when I heard it, a faint cry, almost lost in the rustle of leaves and the evening calls of birds. I paused, straining my ears. There it was again, definitely human, and definitely in distress. Without hesitation, I veered off the trail, following the sound. As I pushed through the undergrowth, the cries grew louder. Finally, I broke into a small clearing and saw him, a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, lying on the ground and clutching his leg. "Hey there," I called out softly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you okay?" The boy looked up, his face streaked with tears and dirt. I fell," he whimpered. "My leg hurts. I can't move it." I approached slowly, my heart aching for this lost child. "It's all right," I soothed. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" "Tommy," he sniffled. "Okay, Tommy. I'm Sarah. Let's take a look at that leg, shall we?" As I knelt beside him, I noticed his clothes were torn and dirty, as if he'd been out here for a while. How long had this poor kid been lost in the woods? I gently examined his leg, relieved to find no obvious breaks. It seemed to be just a bad sprain. "Good news, Tommy. I don't think it's broken. But we should get you back to your family. Are they camping nearby?" Tommy nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Yeah, not too far, but I don't know how to get back." I smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, we'll find them together. Can you walk if I help you?" He shook his head, his lower lip trembling. "It hurts too much." "All right then," I said, making a quick decision. "I'll carry you. Just point me in the right direction, okay?" Tommy nodded, and I carefully lifted him onto my back. He was lighter than I expected, and I could feel his small arms wrapped tightly around my neck. We set off, Tommy giving me vague directions. The sun had fully set now, and the forest was growing dark. I flicked on my headlamp, the narrow beam of light creating eerie shadows among the trees. As we walked, something began to nag at the back of my mind. Tommy's directions seemed to be leading us deeper into the woods, away from any areas where I'd expect to find campsites. But I pushed the thought aside. Kids often got confused in the woods, I told myself. We'd find his family soon enough. After what felt like hours of walking, I saw a faint light through the trees. "Look, Tommy," I said, relief flooding through me. "I think we've found them." But as we got closer, my relief turned to unease. It wasn't a campsite I was seeing, but a ramshackle cabin, barely visible in the gloom. The light was coming from a single, grimy window. "Is this where your family is staying?" I asked, a note of skepticism creeping into my voice. "Yep," Tommy chirped, suddenly sounding much more cheerful. "You can put me down now. I can walk the rest of the way." Alarm bells were ringing in my head, but before I could react, the cabin door burst open. 3 men emerged, their faces hidden in shadow. One of them called out, "Good job, Tommy, you can come here now." Tommy scrambled off my back with an agility that belied his supposed injury. He ran to the men, disappearing behind them into the cabin. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process what was happening. One of the men stepped forward, roused, and I could see his face clearly now, weathered, with cold eyes that sent a chill down my spine. Well, he drawled. "Looks like Tommy brought us a guest. Why don't you come inside? We insist." I took a step back, my heart pounding. "No, I should be going. My campsite isn't far, and people will be expecting me." The man's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, you're a long way from any campsite out here, and no one's expecting you. No one even knows you're here." With shocking speed, he lunged forward, grabbing my arm in a vice-like grip. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. The other 2 men approached, and I saw the glint of a knife in one of their hands. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," the first man growled. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I brought my knee up hard, catching my captor in the groin. As he doubled over, I wrenched my arm free and ran. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face. I could hear shouts behind me, and the crashing of heavy footsteps in pursuit. I ran blindly, with no idea where I was going, driven only by the primal need to escape. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. I could hear them getting closer, their angry shouts echoing through the trees. Suddenly, the ground disappeared from under me. I tumbled down a steep embankment, rocks and branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and in pain. As I struggled to my feet, I realized I'd fallen into a shallow ravine. The sound of rushing water reached my ears, a river, hidden in the darkness. Without thinking, I plunged in, letting the current carry me downstream and away from my pursuers. The water was icy cold, shocking the breath from my lungs. I fought to keep my head above water as the river swept me along. Behind me, I could hear distant shouts of frustration. They'd lost my trail. I don't know how long I was in the water. It could have been minutes or hours. Finally, exhausted and half frozen, I managed to drag myself onto the riverbank. I lay there for a long time, shivering and gasping for breath. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of my situation sank in. I was lost in the wilderness, soaking wet, with no supplies and no idea which direction to go. And somewhere out there, those men were still looking for me. I forced myself to my feet, knowing I couldn't stay in one place. I picked a direction and started walking, using the stars to try and orient myself. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I walked through the night and into the next day, stopping only when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. I found berries to eat and drank from streams, always looking over my shoulder, always listening for the sound of pursuit. It was late afternoon when I finally heard something that wasn't the forest, the distant rumble of a car engine. With renewed energy, I pushed towards the sound. Eventually, I broke through the tree line and saw a road stretching out before me. I flagged down the first car that passed, probably looking like a wild woman with my torn clothes and tangled hair. The elderly couple inside were alarmed at first, but after hearing my story, they quickly offered to drive me to the nearest town. At the local police station, I recounted my harrowing experience. The officers were skeptical at first, but as I described the cabin and the men in detail, their expressions grew serious. They told me there had been rumors of a group living off the grid in those woods, possibly involved in criminal activities. My statement was the first solid lead they'd had. In the days that followed, as I recovered in a small motel, I learned that the police had found the cabin, but it was empty, the men and the boy long gone. They'd vanished into the vast wilderness, leaving behind only questions and the haunting memory of what might have been. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone, and never in unfamiliar territory. The experience taught me that while nature can be beautiful, it can also hide terrible dangers. And sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones that look just like us. Every time I see a lost child now, I'm torn between the instinct to help and the memory of Tommy's betrayal. It's a harsh lesson, but one I'll never forget. That sometimes, an act of kindness can lead you straight into a trap. And in the wilderness, the line between savior and victim can disappear in the blink of an eye. The moment I saw the desk clerk's eyes widen in fear as he handed me the room key, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was too late. We were already trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway for me and my girlfriend, Lily. We'd been dating for a year, and with both of us swamped at work, we desperately needed some time alone together. When I found a great deal on a secluded motel online, it seemed perfect. The reviews were sparse but positive, and the photos showed charming, rustic rooms surrounded by picturesque woodland. We booked it without a second thought. The drive took longer than expected. By the time we pulled into the motel's gravel parking lot, night had fallen, and a thick fog had rolled in, obscuring everything beyond the dim glow of the vacancy sign. The building loomed before us, a hulking shadow against the starless sky. "Well, this is atmospheric," Lily said, trying to sound upbeat, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It'll look better in the daylight. Come on, let's check in and get some rest." The reception area was small and poorly lit, with faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. A musty smell hung in the air, like old books and damp wood. Behind the desk stood a thin, nervous-looking man with darting eyes and a perpetual frown. "Welcome to the Pinewood Motel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you have a reservation?" I gave him our names, and he began typing slowly on an ancient computer. As he worked, I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "Is everything okay?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. He looked up sharply, fear flashing across his face for a split second before he composed himself. "Of course, sir. Just a long night. Here's your key. Room 13. As he handed over the key, our fingers brushed, and I felt him press something into my palm, a small scrap of paper. Before I could react, he turned away, busying himself with some paperwork. Confused, I pocketed the paper and led Lily to our room. The corridor was dimly lit and eerily quiet. Our footsteps echoed off the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Room 13 was at the end of the hall. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a space that looked nothing like the photos online. The furniture was old and battered, the carpet stained, and a single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across the room. "Maybe we should find somewhere else," Lily said, wrinkling her nose at the musty smell. I was about to agree when I remembered the scrap of paper. I pulled it out and unfolded it, my blood running cold as I read the hastily scrawled message. "Don't sleep. Don't shower. Get out." "What's that?" Lily asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the note, watching as her face paled. "We need to leave. Now," I said, grabbing our bags. But as I turned the handle, my heart sank. The door wouldn't budge. I yanked harder, then threw my shoulder against it, but it was like trying to move a brick wall. "What's going on?" Lily's voice was tight with fear. "I don't know, but we're getting out of here," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I moved to the window, but it was sealed shut, the glass too thick to break easily. That's when we heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, coming closer. Lily and I froze, staring at each other in horror as the footsteps stopped right outside our door. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, a key turned in the lock. My mind raced, searching for a way out, a weapon, anything. But there was nowhere to go, nothing to use. We were trapped. The door swung open, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face like chiseled stone. Behind him stood two others, equally imposing. "Well, well," the first man said, his voice a low growl. "Looks like we've got some new guests." I stepped in front of Lily, my heart pounding. "What do you want from us?" The man's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Want? Oh, we don't want anything. You're the ones who came to us, remember? Checked in of your own free will." A chill ran down my spine as the implications of his words sank in. This wasn't a random attack. This was planned. We'd walked right into their trap. "Please," Lily said, her voice shaking. "Just let us go. We won't tell anyone, I swear." The man laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Oh, we know you won't tell anyone. No one ever does." They advanced into the room, and I knew we had to act. In a desperate move, I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and swung it at the nearest man. It connected with a satisfying crunch, and he stumbled back, clutching his face. "Run!" I yelled to Lily, shoving past the stunned man and pulling her with me. We sprinted down the hallway, the sound of angry shouts and pounding footsteps close behind. The reception area was empty, the nervous clerk nowhere to be seen. We burst through the front doors and into the foggy night. Our car was where we'd left it, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. Just as the engine roared to life, a hand smashed through the driver's side window, grabbing at my throat. Lily screamed, and I stomped on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, the hand releasing me as we sped away. In the rearview mirror, I could see figures emerging from the fog, growing smaller as we put distance between us and that hellish motel. We drove for hours, not daring to stop, jumping at every set of headlights we saw. When the sun finally began to rise, we pulled into a busy truck stop, both of us exhausted and shell-shocked. What just happened?" Lily asked, her voice hoarse. I shook my head, still struggling to process it all. "I don't know, but we need to call the police." The local sheriff's department was skeptical at first, but as we recounted our story, providing details about the motel and the men who'd attacked us, their attitude changed. They told us there had been rumors about disappearances in that area for years, but never any solid evidence. In the days that followed, as we gave statements and identified suspects from photo lineups, the full horror of what we'd escaped became clear. The Pinewood Motel wasn't just a front for kidnapping. It was part of a larger trafficking operation that had been operating undetected for years. The police raid on the motel uncovered hidden rooms and evidence of countless victims, but many of the key players, including the men who'd attacked us, had vanished without a trace. Lily and I tried to move on with our lives, but the memory of that night haunted us. We both started having nightmares, jumping at shadows, always looking over our shoulders. Our relationship, strained by the trauma we'd endured, eventually fell apart. Even now, years later, I can't drive past a motel without feeling a surge of panic. The flashing vacancy signs that once promised rest and comfort now seem like warnings, beckoning unsuspecting travelers into darkness. I often think about that nervous clerk who tried to warn us. Did he escape too? Or did he pay the price for his moment of conscience? I'll probably never know. What I do know is that evil can hide in the most ordinary places, waiting for the unwary. A simple booking, a quest for a quiet getaway, can turn into a fight for survival in the blink of an eye. So the next time you're planning a trip, and you come across that perfect deal for a secluded motel, think twice. Because sometimes, the real price of a room is far higher than you could ever imagine. And sometimes, the guests who check in don't check out. The moment I heard the click of the door locking behind me, I knew this wasn't going to be a typical food delivery. The man's eyes, wild and desperate, told me I'd just walked into something far more dangerous than a late-night pizza craving. My name's Mike, and I've been delivering pizzas for Joe's Pizza for about 6 months now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills, and usually, the biggest excitement is hoping for a good tip. That all changed on a quiet Tuesday night in October. It had been a slow evening, and I was about to call it quits when one last order came in. The address was on the outskirts of town, in one of those areas where the houses are few and far between. I'd delivered out there before, so I didn't think much of it. As I drove, the houses became more sparse, the street lights fewer and farther between. The darkness seemed to press in on all sides, broken only by my headlights. I finally pulled up to the house, a large, somewhat run-down two-story that looked like it had seen better days. I grabbed the pizza and made my way to the front door. The porch light flickered ominously, casting strange shadows across the overgrown yard. I rang the doorbell, hearing it echo inside the house. After a moment, the door creaked open. A man stood there, middle-aged, with disheveled hair and a 5 o'clock shadow. His eyes darted nervously behind me before settling on my face. "Joe's Pizza," I said, forcing a smile. "That'll be $15.50. The man nodded, his movements jerky. Come in. I've got the money inside." Warning bells went off in my head. We're not supposed to enter customers' homes, but before I could protest, he had grabbed my arm and pulled me inside. The door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the distinct sound of a lock clicking into place. The interior of the house was dimly lit and cluttered. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the man could hear it. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I really should just wait out." "Shut up," the man hissed, his eyes wild. "They'll hear you." "Who'll hear me?" I asked, confusion mixing with my growing fear. The man didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the window, peering out through a gap in the curtains. "They're out there," he muttered. "Watching. Always watching." I was starting to think I'd walked in on some paranoid delusion when I heard it, a muffled cry coming from upstairs. The man's head snapped towards the sound, panic flashing across his face. "What was that?" I demanded, my fear giving way to a surge of adrenaline. "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just the TV. Now, about that pizza." But I wasn't listening anymore. The cry came again, louder this time. It sounded like a woman, and she was in distress. "There's someone up there," I said, taking a step towards the stairs. "They need help." The man moved with surprising speed, blocking my path. "No one's up there," he growled, all pretense of normality gone. "You're not going anywhere." That's when I saw the gun tucked into his waistband. My blood ran cold as I realized the gravity of the situation I'd stumbled into. "Please," I said, raising my hand slowly. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me go and we can forget this ever happened." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "It's too late for that. You're part of this now." Another cry from upstairs, followed by the sound of something heavy falling. The man's eyes widened in panic. No, he muttered, turning towards the stairs. In that moment of distraction, I acted on instinct. I threw the pizza box at his face, the hot cheese and sauce momentarily blinding him. As he stumbled back, I bolted for the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to open it. Behind me, I could hear the man recovering, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Just as my hand closed around the doorknob, I felt a searing pain in my side. The man had tackled me, sending us both crashing to the ground. We grappled on the floor, my pizza grease-slicked hand slipping as I tried to fend him off. "You don't understand," he panted, his face inches from mine. "I can't let you leave. They'll kill her if anyone finds out." Another scream from upstairs, this one clearer. "Help! Someone please help me!" The man's grip loosened for just a second, his head turning toward the sound. It was all the opening I needed. I brought my knee up hard, catching him in the stomach. As he doubled over, I scrambled to my feet and ran for the stairs. I took them two at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the man behind me, his curses mixing with the woman's cries for help. The upstairs hallway was dark, but I could see a sliver of light coming from under one of the doors. I ran towards it, throwing my shoulder against the wood. The door burst open, revealing a scene that would haunt me for years to come. A woman was tied to a chair, her face bruised and tear-stained. Her eyes widened in surprise and hope as she saw me. "Please," she gasped, "help me." I didn't hesitate. I ran to her, my fingers working frantically at the knots binding her wrists. Behind me, I could hear the man's heavy breathing as he reached the top of the stairs. "Get away from her!" he roared, his footsteps thundering down the hall. The last knot came loose just as he reached the doorway. The woman stood on shaky legs, clinging to me for support. "We have to jump," I said, gesturing to the window. It was our only chance. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. We moved as one, rushing towards the window as the man lunged for us. Glass shattered around us as we crashed through. For a moment, we were falling, the cool night air whipping past us. Then we hit the ground hard, rolling across the overgrown lawn. Pain shot through my body, but adrenaline kept me moving. I staggered to my feet, pulling the woman up with me. We ran, not daring to look back, the sound of the man's enraged shouts fading behind us. We didn't stop running until we reached a gas station about a mile down the road. The attendant took one look at our battered, bleeding forms and immediately called the police. What followed was a whirlwind of police statements, hospital visits, and media attention. The woman, whose name was Lisa, had been kidnapped by the man, her ex-husband, over a week ago. He had been holding her captive, convinced that shadowy figures were out to get them both. As for me, I was hailed as a hero, though I didn't feel like one. I had just been doing a job, delivering a pizza. It was chance, or fate, or maybe just dumb luck that had put me in the right place at the right time to save Lisa's life. In the weeks that followed, as the story faded from the news and life began to return to normal, I found myself unable to shake the memory of that night. Every time I got into my car for a delivery, I felt a twinge of fear. Every darkened house, every strange sound made my heart race. I stuck with the job, though, partly because I needed the money, but also because of something Lisa had said to me in the hospital. "You were my guardian angel," she'd told me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You came when I had almost given up hope." Those words stayed with me, reminding me that sometimes a simple act, like delivering a pizza, can change someone's life forever. It's a heavy responsibility, knowing that any routine call could turn into a life or death situation. But it's also a powerful reminder of the impact we can have on each other's lives, often without even realizing it. So I keep driving, keep delivering pizzas to strangers, homes. And if sometimes I'm a little more cautious, a little more observant of my surroundings, well, can you blame me? After all, you never know when a simple delivery might turn into something much more. The moment I saw the glint of metal under the driver's seat, I knew this wasn't just any used car. What I thought was a great deal had just become a death sentence, and I was now in the crosshairs of people who wouldn't hesitate to kill for what was hidden in this vehicle. It all started innocently enough. I'd been saving up for months to buy my first car, scouring online listings and local dealerships for something reliable but affordable. When I came across the ad for a classic '67 Mustang at a price that seemed too good to be true, I should have known better. But the photos looked great, and the seller, a guy named Mike, seemed friendly enough over the phone. We agreed to meet at a garage on the outskirts of town. It was a bit out of the way, but Mike assured me it was where he kept the car stored. As I pulled up, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement. The Mustang sat gleaming in the sunlight, its cherry red paint job looking far better than I'd expected for the price. Mike was there waiting, a tall guy with an easy smile and a firm handshake. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" he said, patting the car's hood affectionately. I circled the vehicle, trying to appear knowledgeable even though I knew next to nothing about cars. "Looks great," I said, peering at the engine. "Why are you selling it so cheap?" Mike's smile faltered for just a second. You know how it is. Times are tough, need the cash quick. Plus, it's just been sitting here gathering dust." Rather see her go to someone who'll appreciate her. It all sounded reasonable enough, and after a short test drive where the car performed beautifully, I was sold. We did the paperwork right there. Cash exchanged hands, and suddenly I was the proud owner of a classic Mustang. As I drove home, I couldn't stop grinning. The purr of the engine, the admiring looks from other drivers. I felt on top of the world. It wasn't until I got home and started really exploring the car that things took a turn. I was adjusting the driver's seat when I noticed something odd. There was a small tear in the upholstery, and something was glinting inside. Curious, I reached in and felt around. My fingers closed around something cold and metallic. When I pulled it out, my heart nearly stopped. It was a gun, a sleek, deadly-looking pistol that had been carefully hidden in the seat cushion. My mind raced. What was a gun doing hidden in the car? Had Mike forgotten about it? Or was there something more sinister going on? Before I could process this, I heard the screech of tires outside. I looked out the window to see a black SUV pull up. 2 men in dark suits stepping out. They didn't look like police, and the way they were scanning the street sent a chill down my spine. Instinctively, I ducked down, my heart pounding. Through the gap in the curtains, I watched as they approached my house, their hands hovering near their jackets in a way that suggested they were armed. A sharp knock on the door made me jump. "Open up," a gruff voice called. "We know you're in there." I stayed silent, my mind whirling. Who were these men? What did they want? And what had I gotten myself into by buying this car? The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Last chance. Open up or we're coming in." In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. Whatever was going on, it was clear these men meant business, and I doubted they were here to welcome me to the neighborhood. As quietly as I could, I made my way to the back door. I could hear the men at the front, the sound of splintering wood telling me they were forcing their way in. With shaking hands, I unlocked the back door and slipped out into the evening air. I ran to the Mustang, fumbling with the keys. Just as I got the door open, I heard shouts from the house. They'd discovered I was gone. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing. In the rearview mirror, I saw the men running back to their SUV. The chase was on. I sped through the neighborhood, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The SUV was right behind me, gaining ground with every turn. I had no plan, no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away. As I hit the highway, a thought struck me. The gun, whatever these men wanted, it had to be connected to the gun I'd found. Maybe there was something else hidden in the car. Keeping one eye on the road and one on the pursuing SUV, I reached down and felt around the tear in the seat. My fingers brushed against something else. A small, hard object wrapped in cloth. I pulled it out, nearly swerving off the road as I saw what it was. A USB drive. Innocuous looking, but clearly valuable enough for these men to chase me across town. A bullet pinged off the rear of the car, making me duck instinctively. They were shooting at me now, apparently done with the pretense of a peaceful resolution. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever. The Mustang was fast, but the SUV had the advantage of weight and power. I needed a plan, and fast. Up ahead, I saw the exit for the old industrial district, a maze of abandoned warehouses and factories. It was my best shot at losing them. I took the exit hard, the Mustang fishtailing as I struggled to keep control. The SUV was right behind me, the men inside surely grinning at having cornered their prey. But I had one advantage they didn't: desperation. I weaved through the narrow streets, taking turns at random, praying I wouldn't hit a dead end. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, and for a moment, I dared to hope I'd lost them. Then, as I rounded a corner, my heart sank. A chain-link fence blocked the road, too high to drive through. I was trapped. The SUV appeared behind me, cutting off any chance of retreat. The men got out, guns drawn, triumphant looks on their faces. "End of the line, kid," one of them called out. "Hand over the drive and we'll make this quick." I looked at the USB in my hand, then at the guns pointed at me. In that moment, I made a choice. I revved the engine, the Mustang's powerful motor drowning out the men's shouts. With a silent prayer, I floored it. The car shot forward, straight at the fence. The men fired, bullets pinging off the metal around me. But I didn't slow down. The Mustang hit the fence at full speed. There was a moment of resistance, then the satisfying sound of metal giving way. I burst through onto an empty lot beyond, leaving the stunned men behind. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my hands shaking as the adrenaline wore off. I found a 24-hour diner and collapsed into a booth, ordering a coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. As I sat there, the USB drive heavy in my pocket, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Clearly, I'd stumbled into something big, something dangerous. The car, the gun, the drive, it was all connected, and people were willing to kill to get their hands on it. I knew I should go to the police, but would they believe me? And what if these men had connections in law enforcement? No, I realized with a sinking feeling, I was on my own. Whatever was on this drive, whatever I'd gotten myself mixed up in, I had to see it through. As dawn broke, I made my decision. I couldn't go home. It wasn't safe. I couldn't trust anyone. But I had to know what was on the drive, what was worth all this trouble. I paid for my untouched coffee and walked out to the Mustang. As I slid into the driver's seat, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I didn't know where this road would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same. The engine purred to life, and I pulled out onto the empty morning streets. Whatever came next, I was ready. Or at least, I hoped I was. Because something told me this was just the beginning of a very dangerous journey. The moment I heard the muffled voices and saw the flickering lights in the supposedly abandoned factory, I knew my boring night shift had just turned into a fight for survival. What I didn't know was that uncovering this secret operation would push me to my limits and change my life forever. My name's Jack, and I've been working as a night security guard at the old Riverside factory for about 6 months now. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of time to work on my novel. Most nights, my biggest challenge is staying awake during my rounds. That all changed on a chilly Tuesday night in October. I'd just started my shift, settling into the small security office with a thermos of coffee and my laptop. The factory had been shut down for years, a relic of the town's industrial past. Now it was just a hulking shadow on the outskirts of town, waiting for someone to either renovate it or tear it down. Around 2 a.m., I started my first round. The factory was huge, a maze of old machinery and empty storage rooms. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as I made my way through the building, flashlight in hand. I was about halfway through my round when I heard it, a faint sound, like voices coming from the far end of the factory. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was just the wind whistling through the broken windows, or some stray animals that had found their way inside. But as I got closer, the sound became clearer, definitely voices, and definitely human. My heart started to race. In 6 months, I'd never encountered anyone else in the factory at night. Something was very wrong. I switched off my flashlight, not wanting to alert whoever was there to my presence. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed a faint glow coming from under one of the old storage room doors. Cautiously, I crept closer, straining my ears to make out what was being said. The voices were low and urgent, talking about shipments and deadlines. This wasn't just some teenagers looking for a place to party. This sounded serious. I reached for my radio, ready to call for backup, when suddenly the voices got louder. They were coming towards the door. Panic surged through me as I realized I had nowhere to hide. The hallway was long and empty, offering no cover. Just as the door started to open, I made a split-second decision. I ducked into a small alcove, pressing myself against the wall and holding my breath. 2 men walked out, both wearing dark clothes and carrying duffel bags. "We need to move faster," one of them was saying. "The boss wants this shipment out by morning." "Relax," the other replied. "No one ever comes here. We've got all the time in the world." As they passed by my hiding spot, I caught a glimpse inside the room they'd left. My eyes widened in shock. The space was filled with tables covered in white powder, scales, and packaging materials. It was a drug lab, right here in the old factory. My mind raced. What should I do? Call the police? Try to gather more evidence? As I was debating my next move, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I turned to see one of the men staring right at me, his face a mask of surprise and anger. "Hey!" he shouted. "What the hell are you doing here?" I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I bolted, running as fast as I could down the hallway. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of heavy footsteps in pursuit. My heart was pounding as I raced through the factory, trying to remember the layout and find the quickest way out. But in my panic, everything looked unfamiliar. I took a wrong turn and found myself in the old production area, a vast space filled with rusting machinery. I ducked behind an old conveyor belt, trying to catch my breath and think. I could hear the men searching for me, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. "He's got to be the night guard," one of them said. "Find him. We can't let him get out of here." I knew I had to call for help. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone, only to see there was no signal. Of course, the thick factory walls always blocked reception. I'd have to get outside to call for help. As I was trying to figure out my next move, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around to see one of the men, his face twisted in a snarl. "Got you," he growled. Acting on pure instinct, I swung my flashlight, connecting with the side of his head. He stumbled back, cursing, and I took off running again. I could see the exit sign glowing faintly in the distance. Freedom was so close. But as I ran towards it, more figures emerged from the shadows. I was surrounded. "Nowhere to run now, buddy," one of them said, a cruel smile on his face. "You should have minded your own business." I backed up, my eyes darting around for any chance of escape. That's when I saw it, the old freight elevator. Without thinking, I lunged for it, slamming the button and praying it still worked. To my amazement, the doors creaked open. I dove inside just as the men reached me, the doors closing on their angry shouts. The elevator groaned and began to move, taking me up towards the roof. As I caught my breath, I realized I'd only bought myself a little time. They would be waiting for me when the doors opened again. I needed a plan. The elevator shuddered to a stop, and I braced myself. As the doors opened, I was hit with a blast of cold night air. I was on the roof. The town spread out below me, lights twinkling in the distance. I could hear shouts and footsteps coming from the stairwell. They were coming. I ran to the edge of the roof, looking for any way down. That's when I saw it. The old fire escape, rusted but still intact. Without hesitation, I swung myself over the edge and onto the metal stairs. They creaked ominously under my weight, but held. I started to climb down, moving as fast as I dared. I was about halfway down when I heard voices above me. They'd found the fire escape. I looked down. It was still a long drop to the ground. But I had no choice. I took a deep breath and jumped. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my legs, but adrenaline kept me moving. I staggered to my feet and ran, heading for the fence that surrounded the factory grounds. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. The fence loomed ahead, topped with barbed wire. It might as well have been 100 feet tall. But then I saw it. A small gap where the fence had pulled away from the post. It was a tight squeeze, but it was my only chance. I threw myself at it, feeling the metal scratch and tear at my clothes as I wriggled through. I was out. I ran across the empty lot, not stopping until I reached the main road. There, under the glow of a streetlight, I finally pulled out my phone. This time, there was a signal. With shaking fingers, I dialed 911. "Please," I gasped as soon as the operator answered. "I need help." There's a drug operation at the old Riverside factory. They're after me. The next few hours were a blur. Police cars with flashing lights, questions from stone-faced detectives, a trip to the hospital to check out my injuries. By the time the sun rose, the factory had been raided, the drug operation shut down, and several arrests made. As I sat in the police station, giving my statement for what felt like the 100th time, I couldn't help but think about how differently the night could have gone. If I'd been a few seconds slower, if the elevator hadn't worked, if the fence had been intact, I might not have made it out alive. The detectives told me I was a hero, that I'd helped bust one of the biggest drug operations in the state, but I didn't feel like a hero. I felt exhausted, sore, and more than a little traumatized. As I finally left the station, stepping out into the bright morning sunlight, I realized my life would never be the same. My quiet job as a night watchman was over. The simple life I'd known had been shattered. But as I walked home, my body aching but my spirit unbroken, I felt something else too. A sense of pride, of accomplishment. I'd faced true danger and come out the other side. I'd made a difference. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready for it. After all, how many aspiring novelists get to live through their own thriller? The moment I saw his eyes glinting in the flickering porch light, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. What I thought was a refuge from the storm had just become a trap, and I was the prey. It had been a long day on the road. I was driving cross-country, chasing a job opportunity in California that promised to turn my life around. The weather had been perfect for the first 2 days of my journey, but as I crossed into Nevada, things took a turn for the worse. Dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them a downpour unlike anything I'd ever seen. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of my car. I slowed to a crawl, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I strained to make out the road ahead. That's when it happened. A deafening crack of thunder startled me, and I jerked the wheel. My old Honda skidded on the wet asphalt, spinning once before coming to a stop on the shoulder. When I tried to restart it, the engine sputtered and died. No, 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 I muttered, turning the key again and again. Nothing. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, in a storm that showed no signs of letting up. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course, I was miles from the nearest town, surrounded by desert and scrubland. As I sat there, trying to figure out what to do, I saw a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a gas station or a rest stop, somewhere I could at least wait out the storm and call for help. I grabbed my backpack, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the rain. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet, and within seconds I was soaked to the bone. But I pressed on, my eyes fixed on that distant light. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a gas station, but a house. It was an old place, 2 stories of weathered wood and peeling paint. But the porch light was on, a beacon of hope in the storm. I hesitated for a moment at the bottom of the porch steps. Knocking on a stranger's door in the middle of the night wasn't ideal, but neither was staying in my broken-down car or trying to walk to the next town. I climbed the steps and knocked. For a long moment, there was no response. I was about to knock again when I heard movement inside. The door creaked open, revealing a man in his 60s, with weathered skin and sharp, dark eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. I explained my situation, practically shouting to be heard over the howling wind. "I'm sorry to bother you, but my car broke down, and I saw your light. Could I use your phone to call for help?" The man studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside. "Can't leave you out in this storm." Relief washed over me as I stepped inside. The house was warm and dry, if a bit musty. Old newspapers and books were stacked everywhere, and the furniture looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. "The phone's in the kitchen," the man said. leading me through the cluttered living room. "I'm Frank, by the way." "Sarah," I replied, following him. "Thank you so much for this." But when we reached the kitchen, my heart sank. The phone on the wall was an ancient rotary model, its cord frayed and yellowed with age. Frank must have seen my expression. "It still works," he assured me, "but the lines might be down because of the storm. Why don't you get dried off and wait it out? I'm sure it'll pass soon." I hesitated. Every instinct was telling me to leave, to brave the storm, rather than stay in this strange house with this strange man. But another crack of thunder made me jump, and I realized I had no choice. "That'd be great," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you." Frank nodded and disappeared upstairs, returning a moment later with a towel and some clothes. "These were my daughters," he explained. "She doesn't live here anymore." I thanked him, and he showed me to a small bathroom where I could change. As I peeled off my wet clothes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Frank's eyes had lingered on me a bit too long, or the odd way he'd spoken about his daughter. I changed quickly and stepped back into the hallway. That's when I heard it. A thump from upstairs, followed by what sounded like a muffled cry. My heart began to race. "Frank!" I called out. No answer. Against my better judgment, I moved towards the stairs. The crying sound came again. Definitely human. Definitely in distress. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding so loud I was sure Frank would hear it. At the top was a long hallway with several closed doors. The sound seemed to be coming from the one at the end. I approached it cautiously, straining my ears. Yes, there was definitely someone in there. I reached for the doorknob, my hand shaking. Just as I was about to turn it, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around to find Frank standing there, his eyes no longer friendly but cold and hard. Now, he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Didn't anyone ever tell you it's rude to snoop in other people's houses?" I tried to back away, but he held me firmly. "I'm sorry," I stammered. I heard a noise. Frank's grip tightened. "You shouldn't have come up here, Sarah. You really shouldn't have." In that moment, I knew I was in serious trouble. I did the only thing I could think of. I brought my knee up hard, catching Frank in the groin. He doubled over, cursing, and I ran. I thundered down the stairs, hearing Frank's heavy footsteps behind me. I reached the front door and yanked it open, plunging back into the storm. The rain was still coming down in sheets, but fear drove me forward. I ran blindly, slipping and sliding in the mud, the sound of pursuit close behind. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness and the rain. But eventually, I saw lights ahead, real lights, the lights of a town. As I burst onto the main street, I saw a police car parked outside a diner. I ran towards it, waving my arms frantically. The officer got out, alarmed by my appearance. Through gasping breaths, I told him what had happened. More police were called, and soon, a whole team was heading out to Frank's house. What they found there chilled me to the bone. Frank had been kidnapping people for years, luring in stranded motorists and holding them captive. They found 3 people locked in upstairs rooms, including a young woman who Frank had been calling his daughter. In the days that followed, as I gave statements and tried to process what had happened, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to becoming another one of Frank's victims. If I hadn't heard that cry, if I hadn't managed to get away. The experience changed me. I became more cautious, more aware of the potential dangers lurking behind seemingly innocent facades. But it also showed me my own strength, my ability to fight back when it mattered most. I did eventually make it to California, though the job opportunity had long since passed. But I found something else there, a sense of purpose. I started volunteering with organizations that help victims of kidnapping and abuse, sharing my story to help others stay safe. Every time I drive now, especially at night or in bad weather. I think about that stormy night in Nevada. I think about Frank's house, with its welcoming porch light that nearly lured me to my doom. And I'm reminded that sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones that look the most harmless. But I'm also reminded of my own resilience, my ability to survive. That night could have been the end of my story. Instead, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where I'm stronger, wiser, and dedicated to helping others avoid the trap I nearly fell into. So if you're ever driving on a dark, stormy night, and you see a light in the distance promising shelter, think twice. Sometimes, the storm outside is safer than what's waiting behind that friendly porch light. The moment I saw the glint of the knife in his hand, I knew the man who had offered me shelter was no savior. He was a predator, and I had just walked willingly into his lair. It was supposed to be a simple day hike. I'd been feeling stressed at work, and my therapist had suggested I try spending some time in nature to clear my head. The trails in the nearby national forest seemed perfect, challenging enough to be interesting, but well-marked and supposedly safe. I set out early on a crisp Saturday morning, my backpack loaded with water, trail mix, and a first aid kit. The first few hours were exactly what I needed. The fresh air, the sound of birds chirping, the crunch of leaves under my boots. It all helped to melt away the tension I'd been carrying for weeks. But as the day wore on, things started to go wrong. First, I realized I'd underestimated the difficulty of the trail. What was supposed to be a moderate hike turned out to be much more strenuous. Then, clouds rolled in, bringing with them an unseasonable chill and the threat of rain. I decided to turn back, but in my haste, I must have taken a wrong turn. Suddenly, none of the landmarks looked familiar. I tried to retrace my steps, but each attempt only seemed to take me further off course. As the light began to fade and the temperature dropped, panic set in. I was lost. I pulled out my phone, hoping to use the GPS, only to find I had no signal. Of course, I was miles from the nearest cell tower, surrounded by dense forest and steep hills that blocked any hope of reception. As darkness fell, the forest took on a sinister quality. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide some unknown threat. I was cold, tired, and increasingly desperate. That's when I saw it. A faint light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a ranger station or a campground. I moved towards it, my pace quickening despite my exhaustion. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a station, but a cabin. It was a rustic structure, weathered wood and a tin roof, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. A single window glowed with warm light, beckoning me like a beacon in the darkness. I hesitated at the edge of the small clearing. Knocking on a stranger's door in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, wasn't exactly safe. But neither was spending the night lost in the increasingly cold forest. I took a deep breath and approached the door. My knock was answered almost immediately. The door creaked open to reveal a man in his 60s, with a weathered face and sharp blue eyes. He looked me up and down, taking in my disheveled appearance. "You lost?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. I nodded, explaining my situation. To my relief, his expression softened. "Can't leave you out here to freeze," he said, stepping aside. "Come on in. Name's Bill." "Thanks," I said, gratitude washing over me as I stepped into the warm cabin. "I'm Mike. I really appreciate this." The interior was snug and cluttered, every surface covered with books, tools, and what looked like animal pelts. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, filling the space with warmth and the scent of wood smoke. "Sit," Bill said, gesturing to a worn armchair. "I'll make some coffee. Warm you up." As he moved to the small kitchenette, I sank into the chair, the events of the day catching up with me. I was safe. I'd be able to get directions back to my car in the morning. Everything was going to be okay. But as I watched Bill prepare the coffee, Something began to nag at me. Maybe it was the way his eyes kept darting to me, or the tense set of his shoulders. Something felt off. "So," I said, trying to break the tension, "do you live out here full time?" Bill grunted an affirmative. "Going on 30 years now. Don't much care for people or their noise." "Must get lonely," I ventured. He turned to me then, and the look in his eyes made my blood run cold. "Oh, I get visitors now and then," he said, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Folks like you, who lose their way." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I stood up, suddenly feeling the need to put some distance between us. "You know, maybe I should just get going. If you could just point me in the direction of the main trail." "Sit down," Bill said, his voice hardening. And that's when I saw it, the knife in his hand, its blade catching the firelight. My heart began to race. I looked around frantically, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. But Bill was between me and the only door, and the windows were small and likely nailed shut. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Bill's smile widened, showing yellowed teeth. "Company," he said simply. "It does get so lonely out here." He took a step towards me, the knife held loosely at his side. I backed up until I felt the wall behind me. My mind raced, trying to remember the self-defense class I'd taken years ago. "Look," I said, holding up my hands. "You don't have to do this. I won't tell anyone I was here. Just let me go, and we can forget this ever happened." Bill laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the small cabin. "Oh, I'm not worried about you telling anyone. No one would believe you anyway. And even if they did, they'd never find this place, just like they never found the others." The implications of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. Others. How many hikers had wandered to this cabin, thinking they'd found salvation, only to never leave? As Bill took another step forward, I knew I had to act. I feinted to the left, then dove right, aiming for the fireplace. My hand closed around a poker just as Bill crashed into me, sending us both to the floor. We grappled, rolling across the rough wooden planks. The knife flashed, and I felt a searing pain across my arm. But adrenaline kept me going. I brought the poker up hard, catching Bill in the side of the head. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to scramble away. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the latch as I heard Bill getting to his feet behind me. The door flew open and I plunged into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't slow down. I ran blindly through the trees, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear Bill crashing through the underbrush behind me, his angry shouts echoing through the forest. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, fear and adrenaline pushing me beyond what I thought I was capable of. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness and the terror, but eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the normal nighttime noises of the forest. I slowed to a walk, my lungs burning, my legs feeling like jelly. I was lost again, but this time, that seemed like the least of my problems. I was injured, exhausted, and being hunted by a madman who knew these woods far better than I did. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the pain in my arm became more intense. I looked down to see my sleeve soaked with blood. I needed to stop and tend to the wound, but I was afraid to stay in one place for too long. Just as I was about to give in to despair, I heard something that made my heart leap. The sound of running water. A stream or river could lead me out of the forest, or at least to a road or trail. I followed the sound, moving as quietly as I could. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking through the trees. And there, just ahead, I saw it. A small river, its waters reflecting the pale morning light. Relief washed over me, but I didn't let my guard down. I followed the river, staying close to the bank where the terrain was easier to navigate. After what felt like hours, I heard something that brought tears to my eyes, the distant sound of traffic. I quickened my pace, hope giving me a second wind. Finally, I broke through the tree line to see a highway stretching out before me. I flagged down the first car I saw, probably looking like a madman with my torn clothes and bloodied arm. The elderly couple in the car were alarmed at first, but after hearing my story, they quickly offered to drive me to the nearest hospital. As we drove away from the forest, I couldn't help but look back, wondering if Bill was still out there, waiting for his next victim. At the hospital, I told my story to the police. They were skeptical at first, but the evidence of my injuries and my obvious terror convinced them to investigate. They never found Bill or his cabin. It was as if they had vanished into the forest. In the weeks and months that followed, as I recovered from my physical and emotional wounds, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to becoming another missing hiker, another mystery for someone else to solve. The experience changed me, made me more cautious but also more appreciative of life. I still go hiking sometimes, but never alone. And I always make sure someone knows exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. Because I learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that look like they're offering help. And that in the wilderness, the line between savior and monster can be terrifying.